SAOLTA presents Hear the World Differently.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 SDG Advocate Showcase event. My name is Downey, and for anyone who doesn't know me, I am the coordinator of the SDG Advocate Training Project, and I am also one of the co-founders of Development Perspectives. So just to welcome you here this evening, and in recognition of the very turbulent year that we've all had to endure, we really do appreciate your attendance and your support this evening on this project. We have lots of representation here from our board of directors, from Irish Aid, our funders, from SAOLTA, the consortium, from the development education sector, adult and community education sector, our staff, colleagues, all of the advocates, friends and family. And last but not least, we'd like to welcome our keynote speaker, Richard Wilkinson. Now I'm just going to move on to the agenda for this evening. So if we could show the page for the agenda. We'll be starting with Bobby McCormack, the CEO of Development Perspectives, and he'll be introducing the SDG Advocate Training and the work of SAOLTA. Then we'll be moving on to a panel discussion. This will involve the leaders of the SDG Advocate Training, and it will be facilitated by Nick Doran. We'll move then on to a multimedia presentation. This will be a presentation from 4 of our advocates on their action projects. And from there, we'll break out into different rooms, 4 different rooms, and give everybody an opportunity to enter into a discussion for questions and answers with the advocates who have presented their action project on the multimedia presentation. From there, we'll introduce Richard Wilkinson. So the whole team will come back together. We'll introduce Richard Wilkinson, and Richard will give his input for approximately 20 minutes. There'll then be a questions and answers session after that to give all of you an opportunity to discuss Richard's input, and then after that, final closing activity. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Bobby McCormack, who is the CEO of Development Perspectives, and Bobby will be the moderator for tonight. So into you, Bobby.
Cheers, Mog. Thanks a million. Nice to see everybody. As Mog said, this is an exciting evening for us. The SDG Showcase is a highlight of our year every year, and this year is no different, although it is different in so many ways. But maybe just to give you a little bit of an idea of SAOLTA before we start. So the word itself is fantastic because it means worldly wise. And I think really the world and the situation that we find ourselves in, we could all do with more the merrier in terms of worldly wise people. It's a high aspiration, but I think you'll find that the advocates that you hear from this evening are indeed that worldly wise, as well as the leaders that will speak later. I suppose the consortium members that are involved in SAOLTA, it's not just Development Perspectives. We're the lead partner in the consortium, but it involves other key partners and agencies. So we've got AINTIS, of course, Irish Rural Link, Concern Worldwide, and the Department of Adult and Community Education from Maynooth University. We started the consortium not too long ago, in August 2019. It seems like a lifetime ago now at this stage, so much has changed. But we've done a lot in the short time that we're here. We hope to do a lot more into the future. The first phase of SAOLTA is due to come to an end at the end of 2021, but we really hope that it will go far further than that, not just in terms of the lifetime of the program, but in terms of the legacy that hopefully it will leave behind. I suppose the outcome, just to give you an idea of what we're trying to achieve, and the SDG Advocate Program is part of this, I suppose, efforts to achieve this overall program outcome. And I'm just going to read it out. Increased accessibility, quality and effectiveness of development education within the adult and community education sector. So I suppose those that would be familiar with development education, would know what it is, but oftentimes jargon can put people off. So in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is to get people to be more informed about the world around them, the challenges that face their communities. We're trying to get them more actively involved in addressing those challenges. But of course, realizing that it's not just about informing people, it's about inquiring as well. And so part of our role is to try to get people to be more inquisitive and curious about the problems that face our communities and the underlying causes to those problems. It's an ambitious program, but one that we're very excited by. And as I say, this program, the SDG Advocate side of things, is a key part of it, and one that we're very proud of. In terms of the advocates themselves, just to give you an idea, we kind of talk about these things like Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and again, abbreviations can be off-putting for people. The Sustainable Development Goals were 17 goals that were agreed to in 2015 by many countries from across the world. Ireland was one of those countries. We realised that, I suppose, that achieving those goals, over a 15-year period, now 10, it's very onerous, and that we really need communities across, not just Ireland, but across the world, coming together as much as possible, working in partnership for the goals. So I suppose SAOLTA, in a way, is a reflection of that working in partnership. But we realized that we need people to really kind of take charge of these goals, make them their own. Governments alone cannot achieve these goals. We need active citizens. We need active citizens who are willing to address issues that they're passionate about. The advocates themselves are a credit, not just to their families, as we hear in GAA circles, but to their communities. They've really kind of outdone themselves in so many ways. When we started this journey together, who would have foreseen what, I suppose, 2020 would have had in store for us? Earlier on this year, we met in Barlow House in Drogheda with the hopes of bringing people overseas to partners in Tanzania and Vietnam. Little did we know at that stage that those plans could not be fulfilled. Earlier on this year, there was 5 different visits to wonderful organizations that you'll hear a little bit about when the advocate leaders speak. So we've had a varied program involving different parts. And here we are, 6, 7, 8 months after beginning our journey together. And I think it's important to recognize this isn't the end of anything, that it's maybe an important milestone that we're recognizing this evening and celebrating this evening. But we do hope that the advocates will remain involved, maybe not directly with us, but maybe with some other organizations that are represented in this call, that maybe they'll go on to get involved maybe in the academic side of things, further study, further research. Maybe they'll go on and be involved in rural community and life in Ireland in different organizations around the country. Maybe they'll be working overseas, as some of our former advocates are. I saw the recent round of diplomat postings, and I think there was 3 or 4 former advocates involved. So many of our former advocates are certainly involved politically, they're involved socially, they're involved economically. They are and do what it says in the tins. They are advocates, they are activists, they are campaigners, they are educators. And what's really important for us to frame, I suppose, in terms of SAOLTA, is that what we're trying to do is that the participants this year are active within the adult and community sector. That's very important for us. And we're going to try and improve that over the lifetime of SAOLTA. The multipliers, their role, that's crucial in terms of education, because we do want to get development education firmly embedded right across the adult and community education sector. In the next couple of minutes, you're going to hear from Aileen, Michelle, Lisa, Katie, and Karen. I had to write the names down in case, God forbid, I forgot one of them. In case, you'll hear directly from them. And that discussion will be moderated by Nick Doran, who's the project officer within SAOLTA.
Thanks for doing, Bobby. Hey, everybody, and welcome to this evening's proceedings. So Nick Doran is my name, and as Bobby had mentioned, I'm the project officer for SAOLTA in Development Perspectives. So I've been given the pleasure this evening of hosting a chat with this year's leaders in the Advocate Programme. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes with this year's leaders who have supported and contributed to this edition of the Advocate Programme. So each of the leaders, as Bobby had mentioned, have been advocates in previous years and have brought their invaluable experience to bear in an energetic and idea-filled ways. So for this year's programme, each leader conceived of, planned and actioned a global citizenship study visit relating to different UN SDGs. So the study visits were designed to bring this year's advocates through multiple issues encapsulated in the SDGs through experiential activities. So the leaders, as Bobby had mentioned, are Karen Kelly, Aileen Devaney, Lisa O'Rourke, Katie Lynch, and Michelle Jackson. So Karen was involved with Wild Awake, which create experiences based around rekindling environmental and cultural resilience through relearning ancestral and traditional skills. Aileen was involved with her project, was involved with Spirazi, which supports and rehabilitates asylum seekers and refugees who are victims of torture and helps to rebuild their lives in Ireland. Lisa was involved with Secret Street Tours of Dublin. So Secret Street Tours is a non-profit social enterprise offering walking tours to discover the streets of Dublin through the eyes and experiences of someone who's been affected by homelessness. Katie was working with Financial Justice Ireland. So Financial Justice Ireland worked to encourage people to get and to achieve more just financial system in Ireland through exploring the causes rather than just the symptoms of inequality. And finally, Michelle her project revolved around Clock Jordan, which aims to share with the wider community the lessons learned during the first 15 years of creating and managing Ireland's first eco-village. So I think they're all really, really exciting study visits and projects they're working on in their own right. So I'm excited to be able to chat to them all here this evening. So without further ado, I'll ask my first question, which I'm going to aim at you, Michelle, if you don't mind. So why did you feel Clock Jordan was an important study visit?
Thanks, Nick. I felt Clock Jordan was really important because it's one of a kind. It's the only eco-village in Ireland. It does tremendous work. It touches on a whole range of the SDG pillars, sustainable cities. It looks at political community decision-making, climate change. We had a brilliant day. They were more than welcoming when we got there. Veronica and Julie showed us around Clock Jordan, and it was a brilliant experience. I wanted the advocates and myself to see how an eco-village would work and how to put active citizenship in practice. And I felt like it was a great study visit to go on.
That sounds brilliant. That really sounds fantastic. Katie, if you don't mind, what did you learn from planning and designing your study visit?
Well, I learned a lot, I suppose, from just the orchestration, well, especially this year, because everything ended up having to be online, and it was Maeve from Financial Justice Ireland and I were planning this kind of great in-person workshop, but it was going to be kind of both of our first times facilitating anything in person. And I think just the excitement of that was great. And then we ended up doing an online workshop, but it was just, I suppose, you know, the adapting to every kind of restriction that came up and every, you know, sort of, yeah, just everything that we had to adapt to. So it was challenging, but I think we both ended up kind of really enjoying doing another online workshop. But it worked really well, and we got a few more advocates in, because I think at the time indoor gatherings were only 5 people or something like that. So I think we ended up having a bigger group online, so it was really good. But I think we're just learning how we can adapt things online, and actually this space can be just as real, I suppose, as the kind of real world. But yeah, no, it was a great learning. It was really good.
Lisa, I'm going to move over to you if you don't mind. So what impact do you think or do you feel that your study visit had?
Well, there's a few impacts I hope it had. I think just being there with somebody who had been affected by homelessness was probably the most impactful, and actually walking around the streets where he used to spend his days, learning about how he put in his day and like different facilities that are available to him. That was very impactful. As regards like the development education side, I'd hope that, you know, would inspire a bit of, you know, systems thinking maybe, or like break it down, like how did this happen, you know, where the system has failed this person, maybe a bit of inspiration as regard active citizenship, you know, how to solve this problem or get involved with, you know, thinking about the bigger social issues. So just hopefully a bit of inspiration, but also like a bit of inspire a bit of empathy as well, you know, because one of the most important parts of the visit and meeting Shane, that was the tour guide, I think, was realising the human and the story behind it, and also realising how easily any of us could actually end up being homeless. So, and you know, you see it every day in the city, it's just getting more and more. And actually I just saw a bit on the news there about how homelessness is becoming a big problem in rural rural areas now as well. So yeah.
Thanks for that, Lisa. Aileen, I'm going to go over to you. How did your study visit link with the work of DP? So your study visit with Sprazzi.
Development Perspectives is part of STIRA. So it's supporting the integration of the resettled. And they had actually facilitated a webinar on mental health and migrant women. So the therapy coordinator, Ashton Hearns from Sprazzi, was actually one of the guest speakers at that webinar event. So that was kind of like maybe when I first suggested Sprazzi, Margaret told me that, that DP had already worked with them. So it was great to have that contact there at the start.
Okay, brilliant. And again, I was thinking it must have been also quite an emotive kind of space to be bringing people through, working with people who had been affected so much by torture and have had such difficulties in their lives. How was that element of it?
It was just, I suppose, when they kind of talked through the whole immigration system and, the issues that refugees and asylum seekers had to face, you just realize there's so much that you don't know about, that you don't hear. And like the impact that it has and the long-term impact that it has is, just a really cause for concern. And you just, really kind of want to get involved and help and assist and even learn about it and spread the word where you can.
Karen, I'm going to go over to you now. So describe some of the activities that you had on your study visits, and how were they linked to the SDGs?
I took a group to Wild Awake, which is the Phoenix Park Forest School. So they're these wonderful kind of environmental and cultural experiences. Lucy, the lady who set up and who is Wild Awake herself, she looks to reconnect people with nature and get them immersed in hands-on experiences. So, for example, the humble nettle, for example, is something that we might all look as a weed or something to avoid. And Lucy took us on this amazing experience, this journey with it. So how to pick it, the uses. So we made a tincture out of it, a healing tincture and balm. We made nettle crisps, which are incredibly tasty. I highly recommend. We also made wonderful tea, and we saw the value of it for things like kidney and its nourishing effects. So for well-being. And even what was really, really incredible was from the stalk of the nettle, we peeled away the outside and we were able to make a string. And believe it or not, it is a phenomenally strong string. I still have my piece of string. And they were just really fun and interactive ways. But all of a sudden you're finding out that something, changes. It's all about changing perspective. So it's not about looking at some, healing product that's got to come from faraway countries. It's the thing that is the humble nettle on our own doorstep. It's about how we become more effective earth stewards by having a bit more compassion for the nature that's right there at our feet, and doing it in a really fun and enjoyable way. And also it was lovely to do it. We did it around a fire, and we foraged in that part of the forest that we were in the Phoenix Park, which was, it was really interactive. It was fun. It kind of brought out that childlike way of learning, and it's a great way to learn and create community. So a shared experience. So maybe if I can just get a final word from each of you, what was your key takeaway from running these study visits? Just with regards to, again, just following up on that about which one of the SDGs does it link into? So the workshop with Wild Awake, there's the obvious environmental SDGs such as the climate action and life on land, but also just linking into your final question, there's also things like good health and well-being and quality education. And for me, in that day, I think I can speak for everybody who attended, was we remembered what it is to learn through that more informal approach, like through doing and by picking up and, foraging and, learning how to pick nettles. And that learning doesn't have to be so structured and clinical. And that actually, when you learn like that, you're more likely to have more compassion to the subject.
Anybody else?
If you have a goal or if you have a project, persevere and keep going. Like, that's 20 years on in Clock Jordan, and they are still making mistakes, but they've achieved so much. So I think if you have a goal, like, be inspired and keep going, because you will reach it.
I suppose one of the big takeaways from the Secret Street Tours is that, you know, people who were living in poverty, homeless, have the opportunity to become empowered and take the step, you know, and it inspires everyone else to feel like you can become empowered and make changes. So that was a big takeaway for me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lisa.
I think one of my main takeaways was Maeve at one point used the analogy that, like, we all have confidence in going to the doctor because we kind of know, okay, I know there's something wrong, you know, I can see there's something wrong, and I'm going to go and find an expert, and I'm going to figure out what's going on. And just that sense that we don't necessarily do that about economics or about the financial systems, and we don't kind of talk to our politicians about it the way we would talk about other issues. Well, most of us anyway, not to speak for everyone. But so I suppose that sense that actually we're all empowered to look critically at the system that we're in, you know, and to kind of examine it, and that it's not this kind of big overwhelming structure that we can't understand. But we can all be involved in it as well. So that was my takeaway.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie.
I suppose, like, from Sprazzy, it just made me realize that the system is flawed for direct provision, and, you know, there's a lack of resources. But then on the other hand, there's some people who are doing, like, amazing work. I think they have over 100 volunteers. So that's, like, really inspiring as well. So yeah, that was it. There's a lot of amazing work going on, and maybe just highlighting it for them. That's one charity.
Well, listen, guys, like, I think I speak for everyone when I say you did absolutely amazing work with your study visits, and what you did was you created the epitome of experiential learning. And I mean, you've really brought so many of the advocates, or all of the advocates, on such an incredible journey through different areas of life and existence. So listen, thank you very much, and I really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm now going to just hand back over to Bobby, who I think is going to introduce the Advocates Project video piece. So Bobby.
Cheers for that, Nick. Cheers again to the leaders for their contributions. And what you're going to hear in the next couple of minutes is basically an audio visual that was put together by another one of our advocates. So what you're going to see and hear is some details about the ideas and projects of 4 of our SDG advocates this year. But please keep in mind that this was put together by Anya, who's another one of our advocates, who's got an interest in radio and podcasting and stuff. And she was kindly supported by Alan Markey, who's on this call as well, who will be producing a podcast as a result of this evening's work. So you're not just seeing, I suppose, the action projects of the people that you'll hear from, but you're also, you know, seeing something that was the work of another one of the advocates. So I think Nick is going to run the video from his side of things, and you'll hear back from me in a couple of minutes.
SAOLTA presents Hear the World Differently.
Hi, my name is Anne Hannon. I chose to take part in Development Perspectives SDG Advocacy Programme because I feel that this is an urgent issue for humanity, and I was finding that I never seem to have time to research the issues that I care about. So by joining the project, it would catapult me into a space where I would increase my knowledge about the SDGs and try to make some level of positive contribution in an informed way. My action project involves collating resources for tutors to use to introduce the idea of the SDGs in their teaching and learning. The SDG, of course, that focuses on this is SDG 4, Quality Education. Honestly, I'm interested in all the SDGs, but as I work as a tutor, then this SDG makes the most sense for me to work with. I guess the motivation to start here with a resource pack for tutors is because this is where I work. I think it's good to start from a place that is familiar. Initially, I was worried about having to raise funds to go abroad as part of the program. Although this is a wonderful and really experiential part of the program, the fact that we could not do that this year actually alleviated some concerns I had about arranging a fundraiser. In addition, engaging virtually and enhance my knowledge of tools such as Zoom and Padlet and Jamboard, which I'm really thankful for. I'm only at the beginning of this project and this journey. The next steps will be to sift through the tutor feedback that I've received from an information session that I held recently, and to update my resources based on reflection, evaluation, and then further action. So again, I'm only at the start of this journey. As Matsuo Basho would say, every day is a journey, and the journey itself is home.
I choose to take part in the Development Perspective SDG Advocacy Program of this year 2020 because I wanted to be more informed about the SDGs when I am taking actions. I also wanted to network and meet the like-minded Changemakers Collective. My action project involves the establishment of the Wexford Environmental Network to empower local environmental groups to bring about change in our county. The action focuses on mobilising local community participants to take actions that plays its part in the global picture. It addresses SDG 17, Partnership for all SDGs goals, locally, nationally and internationally. I got motivation when I looked around in my local area. I saw scattered local groups doing their best individually on environmental issues. And I thought it would be a great idea to bring these groups together to join efforts under one umbrella organisation. This work would not be possible without the hard working and dedication of the Wexford Environmental Network team, as we share together the same values, goals and vision. Certainly this year of 2020 has been unprecedented as COVID-19 has changed the lifestyle and planning of many of us globally. Coronavirus has impacted my action project to connect and engage more with the wider community groups locally and nationally. However, I am grateful of the continuous support and mentoring by Development Perspective staff throughout my action project to make it a reality. My next steps after the SDG program is to continue working together with the Wexford Environmental Network team in building and empowering local community groups and individuals to bring about change and make meaningful impact on protecting the future of the next generation.
I chose to be part of the SDG Advocate Programme because I really wanted to be part of a group of enthusiastic change makers. So my action project is looking at the overlap between the climate crisis and our mental well-being. So this addresses two SDGs, good health and well-being and climate action. What motivated me to take on this action project was my own experience dealing with the emotional intensity of the climate crisis. There's a real overlap between mental health and well-being and the health and well-being of our earth. And weaving those together in my own life has really helped me to become much more resilient and happier in my day-to-day life. So often people experience major burnout, especially activists and volunteers. So my perspective shifted, and in one way I might say that it deepened, because I was looking to do more outward focused projects. I wanted to do an in-person storytelling event with older farmers and young climate activists. It wasn't really appropriate to do. I didn't think doing it online would necessarily suit them. So this idea is still there, but it's on the back burner. The COVID-19 pandemic has been so difficult for so many people, and I made it my business to look for the opportunity. So I thought that having to learn to let go of things like in-person study visits and a potential trip to Tanzania really helped me to become more resilient to change, and I found that really beneficial. Eco-grief is the mourning that we feel in response to experienced or anticipated ecological loss. So there's a lot there that needs to be worked through, and grief is messy. So going forward from here, what I want to do is complete my training as a funeral celebrant, which is enabling me to support and hold people better in their grief. Down the line, I would really love to open a natural burial ground. Once a site is a burial ground, it's basically indefinitely protected. That's a little bit what the future holds, so at the moment I'm writing a business plan to put that in place, and yeah, we'll see how it goes.
I'm Fiachra. I chose to take part in Development Perspective's SDG Advocacy Program because I think the world needs a new story. It needs to change its trajectory. We need a new way of doing business. And I saw the SDG Advocacy Program as a way for me to figure out how I could be part of the solution and how I could be of maximum service to my community. My action project involves a podcast called Distant Voices and addresses the SDGs on quality education and responsible consumption consumption and production. So every week I interview someone else on an aspect of sustainable development, and we try to look at a few different viewpoints and then to facilitate the listener to figure out what's actually going on by using critical thinking and systems thinking skills. The idea being that they will come to a conclusion themselves, and then we'll facilitate them to take an action, which might be sending a letter, might be signing a petition, or they may just become multipliers as well. What motivated me to take the action project, well, the original plan was to design a score sheet for corporations and for products, and that still is to an extent, but that's the longer term plan. So my perspective did shift when I realized the amount of legalities. The idea now is to focus more on education and to help people make up their own mind about products and to create more transparency. With COVID-19, I didn't get many challenges to the project because we were online. I bought a microphone and we installed some software for recording in higher quality. There was a lot of Zoom, and there still is a lot of Zoom in my life. Our study visit was with Financial Justice Ireland, which was very interesting, informative. Again, that was on Zoom, and I hope to link in with them. I think the financial justice is very, very important. I plan to continue the podcast. My dream for it is that it would become something that was available to people all over the world, and I'm very much interested in the idea of using technology to solve that issue. I'm also enrolled in a Master's in Sustainable Development with UCD, so I'm using the learnings from that Master's program to design more podcast episodes. The plan is to get those out to as many people as possible.
Hopefully you enjoyed that session with our advocates and leaders. Hopefully you found it inspiring. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Richard Wilkinson. To many of you, his work goes before him. I'm going to just hold up my copy of The Spirit Level, which is dog-eared and used for so many occasions over the last couple of years. Professor Richard is Professor Emeritus of Social Epidemiology at the University of Nottingham Medical School, Honorary Professor at University College Dublin, and Visiting Professor at the University of York. As you know already from me mentioning that he wrote The Spirit Level, co-authored with Kate Pickett, and is one of the co-founders of the Equality Trust. And as we know, equality, goal 10, reduced inequalities, is a key part of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think it goes without saying really that any of us that are interested in looking at income and wealth inequality and how that then has an impact on social outcomes and health outcomes, the go-to person is Richard and his work. And not only, I suppose, some of his more published books, but articles that he's recently published in The Guardian, very thought-provoking about the connection between COVID-19 and the possible impact on inequality. So, Richard, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you. And I just want to thank you on behalf of Development Perspectives and SAOLTA for taking this time. So take it away.
Thank you, Bobby. Actually, we've written a more recent book, The Inner Level, which touches on the psychological side of effects of inequality. I will just touch on them during this short talk. What I want to start off doing is really talking about the way people understand poverty and inequality. I'm going to start off by reading you a couple of paragraphs from a study in which they interviewed people in poverty in both rich and poor countries. They interviewed people in poverty in Uganda, in India, China, Pakistan, Korea, in United Kingdom and Norway. And of course, in material terms, poverty means totally different things in those societies. Now, in India, it might be living in a one-room shack with an earth floor and with no sewerage. And in Norway, it might be a three-bedroom centrally heated flat with most of a lot of the latest electronics. But why I'm reading it to you is because the subjective experience of poverty they found was remarkably similar. regardless of those material differences. They say respondents universally despised poverty and frequently despised themselves for being poor. Parents were often despised by their children, women despised their menfolk, and some men were reported to take out their self-loathing on their partners and children, despite respondents generally believing that they'd done their best against all odds. They mostly considered that they had both failed themselves by being poor and that others saw them as failures. This internalization of shame was further externally reinforced in the family, the workplace, and in their dealings with officials. Even children couldn't escape this shaming, for with the possible exception of Pakistan, school was an engine of social grading, a place of humiliation for those without the possessions that guaranteed social acceptance. For men, relying on others or on welfare benefits was perceived as a challenge to their sense of masculinity. A British father of 2 children admitted, "I feel like shit. I'm the man in this relationship. I'm meant to be the man to take care of the missus and my kids, and I don't." You see, people so often leave out all that social and psychological side as if the problem is simply having too little of anything. But what I'm talking about is an effect, a social effect that actually isn't just confined to the poor. We all feel those issues of inferiority. I'm going to now share my screen and show you some slides. So I've just read you something from this study, Robert Walker, and there's just pictures to show you the contrast in what poverty meant materially and those differences. But you see, the ordinary, everyday, common view of inequality is that it only matters if it creates poverty, absolute poverty, or seems very unfair. But I want you to think of inequality as a social relationship, structuring us as if in a hierarchy of superior and inferior. Basically, inequality makes class and status more important. It increases those feelings of superiority and inferiority and affects the way we treat each other, increasing anxieties about self-worth and so on. So I want you to understand inequality as a social relationship affecting how we sort of feel about ourselves in relation to each other, how we see other people in terms of superiority and inferiority. It's that does the really psychological damage, makes people feel devalued. I'm going to show you now a series of slides going through first some of the psychological effects of inequality, and then I hope to have time to show you what's going on behind the data. Basically, I'm going to show you this slide repeatedly with different health and social problems up the side and inequality along the bottom. And greater inequality is always on the right-hand side. So this graph, which we did in the spirit level, it basically, it's an index of health and social problems, but basically it combines those things listed on the left. They're all weighted equally. So where a country is its sort of average performance on those outcomes. And what you're seeing is that in the more unequal countries on the right, they do worse. The USA, Portugal, Britain, those countries on the right doing worse. And on the left, Norway, Sweden, Japan, Finland doing much better. We were worried that people would think we'd just chosen problems to suit our argument. So we also looked at an index somebody else had made up, the UNICEF Index of Child Wellbeing. And basically, it shows exactly the same thing. It looks different because doing worse is scored low here, whereas doing worse was scored high on the other one. The UNICEF Index of Child Wellbeing is designed to measure well-being in rich countries. It has about 40 different components. So whether there's bullying in schools, how kids, whether they feel they can talk to their parents, whether they have books at home, how they do in maths and literacy tests, and measures immunization, for instance, all that goes into this measure of child well-being. So kids do worse in more unequal countries, just as I showed on that previous slide, and all those different health and social problems, countries do worse. This is a new piece of work just come out in the last few months. People have done experiments, psychological experiments or tests of honesty or something, leaving wallets around and seeing whether they get returned. And this is someone who simply related the results of that kind of work to inequality. And you can see that the more unequal countries on the right, only about 20% of wallets get returned, but in the more equal countries on the left, it's about 80%. So huge differences. Basically, it's a sense, tells us a bit about how people relate to each other in those different societies. This, quite different, is about imprisonment. The vertical axis is a log scale, so it's a bit harder to tell where intermediate points are, but Japan is about, on the left there, is about 40 prisoners per 100,000 population, and the US is something like 600. So there are just vast differences in the proportion of the population locked up, closely related to inequality. It's not primarily driven by more crime. A little bit of it's more crime, but most of it is more punitive sentencing. You're getting locked up for longer and for smaller offences and so on. This is, and people imagine that inequality is good for the economy and inventiveness and initiative, all that kind of stuff. But we did a little graph to test that out, looking at patents. If you invent something, or you have a good idea, you might take out a patent on it. But someone else has done a more recent study with more countries and so on. And it shows a clear tendency for more unequal countries on the right to be less inventive, less creative, less initiative, if you like. That's, really quite a pronounced effect. The other thing that people think justifies inequality is they think that if everyone can find their right level in society, that it's fair. The idea, if you work hard, you get the rewards, you move up. If you don't, you move down. And this probably goes with the idea that the poor are poor because they're lazy and stupid, that kind of thing. What this graph shows is that there is less social mobility in countries with bigger income differences. The measure of social mobility is the correlation between fathers' and sons' incomes. So it's intergenerational mobility. It's asking, do rich fathers have rich sons and poor fathers have poor sons? Or isn't there any relationship? And what you're seeing here is the more unequal a society is, the more your father's income matters. It's not mothers and daughters, because with these intergenerational mobility, the changes in the proportion of women working makes it harder to look at that. I want now to show you what I think is close to the core of the damage that inequality is doing behind these sorts of graphs. The first one is this one showing that community life drops away in more unequal societies. This is participation in local groups, in voluntary groups, whether people belong to, gardening clubs or choirs or whatever it is, much lower and more unequal societies. And there are a number of studies of that all showing the same sort of picture. I should have said earlier, we did all this work twice. We did it amongst these rich developed countries, but we also did it amongst the 50 American states, using the 50 states as a sort of separate test bed to see whether inequality has the same effects in quite different setting. And the picture is almost identical. It's quite extraordinary. There are also studies of how much people feel they can trust others. Really important dimension of social life. This is from the World Values Survey, and people are asked whether they agree that most people can be trusted. And you see that in more unequal countries, only about 15-20% feel they can trust others, whereas in the more equal countries, it's 60 or 65% feel they can trust other people. And I like to add, if you're walking home alone in a big city, you'll be much more relaxed about it if you're in a more equal country. And actually, this does go with increases in violence, as I'll show you. But there are now also papers that show that people are less willing to help each other in more unequal countries, to help the disabled or elderly or whatever. And I said violence increases. There are now lots of papers, probably about 60 in the peer-reviewed journals, showing that this pretty reliable pattern for violence as measured by homicide rates to be higher in more unequal societies. These red dots are American states, the blue triangles are Canadian provinces. And you've got, about 15 homicides per million population at the bottom there, going up to 150 or so. So again, huge differences in outcome. Kate Pickett has recently shown that this isn't just sort of street violence or anything, it's also domestic violence that increases with inequality. So what's happening is you're losing that reciprocity, that community life, people's involvement with each other. And actually, if you go to much more unequal countries than the ones I'm looking at here, if you go to places like South Africa or Mexico, you find that it's gone a stage further. People are actually afraid of each other. They barricade their houses, the bars on windows and doors, and razor wire around their garden on top of the fences, all that kind of thing. And so what inequality is doing is getting absolutely at the core of social life. And, COVID, we're not allowed to meet each other as we used to, but we're at least not afraid of each other in this sense. I haven't thought of making comparisons between this and COVID, but there's so many studies now, people who've studied the determinants of happiness or of health, who show that actually the quality of social relations, your involvement in community life, the number of friends you have, is crucial to both well-being, happiness, and health. Friendship is highly protective of health. And so inequality is going right into that. Those are the pictures of Mexico and South Africa that I talked about. But look, we're not talking now about something quite different from the tendency we've always known about for all these problems to be worse at the bottom of society. Basically, I think we're talking about whether our sort of social pyramid is a very steep one like that or a much shallower one like that. And as I said right at the beginning, bigger income differences make class and status more important. So you can see there's more residential segregation, fewer interclass marriages. I've shown you that community life weakens and so on. So the whole structure, hierarchy becomes more ossified. And if you think of living in a society where some people seem supremely important and others are regarded as almost worthless, we all become more worried about how we are seen and judged. We're judging each other more by status, taking your status as if it was a measure of personal worth, external wealth as a measure of personal worth, and we're of course afraid that other people are doing that with us. And so we all become more insecure about our own self-worth, more worried about other people's judgments. And there are now studies, this actually comes from Dublin, Richard Layton, Christopher Whelan did this paper. Along the bottom is not inequality, but all the income groups. So the poorest tenth of the population in each country is on the left, the richest tenth on the right. That top line is status anxiety in all those income groups in the more unequal countries. The bottom line is the lower levels of status anxiety in all the income groups in more equal countries. So you can see we all become more twitchy about status, about what other people think of us, basically. And it's a really important rot, if you like, at getting into social relations. I think this is, I don't know whether you can read this very fast, but this is a quote I found, someone who says that, well, actually, there's reasons why I can't read it to you. I've got my camera in front of it, so I'll just leave you to read it. So you see that fear of how you're seen and judged. And that's what that last slide is really telling us about. Your personal worth, the stakes are raised. And of course, one of the things we do about that to make ourselves look good is you buy status goods. And studies have now shown that inequality intensifies consumerism. If you live in more unequal areas or more unequal countries, you're more likely to spend money on flashy cars or clothes with the right designer labels and so on. It also affects mental health, so that, you know, your response to feeling other people are judging you all the time might be you start to find social contact just too stressful. And so you withdraw from social life, you avoid going to parties and so on, you become too worried you won't have anything to say and what will they think of me and all that. But the other response, of course, if you're worried about people judging you, is you get quite narcissistic. You start to flaunt and exaggerate your achievements and abilities and so on, and find ways of bringing into conversation your successes and things that show you off well. So all this increased attention on basically self-presentation. And that is very damaging to mental health, I think. These extraordinary surveys, I'm sorry this isn't Irish data, but you know, if you think of a country where most people are living in historically unparalleled luxury and comfort, and 3/4 of them are so stressed they felt overwhelmed or unable to cope, and 1/3 of them had suicidal feelings as a result of stress, and half that number had actually self-harmed. And it's absolutely preposterous that we live in it. And yet when these survey results come out, journalists, the demand in the media is always for more services, not instead to think, what the hell's going on to make our society so stress-ridden as this? And I think it is to do with our worries about how we're seen and judged, that are, you know, of course they're there anyway, but they're intensified by inequality. Inequality raises the stakes on all those things. And it does, as I said, feed into mental illness. And so you see here a recent paper in the British Medical Journal showing many personality disorders and mental illnesses are more common in more unequal societies. The correlation with inequality is along the bottom. So those bars to the right all the conditions showing how much more common they are in more unequal societies. So I think I should stop now, just to say that the material I've been taking you through is covered in much more detail in those two books Bobby mentioned in the beginning. Okay, thank you. Glad to have questions.
So thanks so much, Richard. I'm sure people are dying to ask questions. I can see people in the chat box have raised.
Don't feel it has to be a question if you just want to say something.
Super. So there you heard it, folks. If you just wish to say something, now's your time. Can I just ask a little around, we know that that's potentially the situation. So what's then the solution in terms of dealing with income inequality? Like, what do you propose in terms of how do we, as people involved in education or activism more generally, what should we do to try to decrease this?
Well, sometimes people suggest that maybe we can all be nicer to each other and not make these judgments and so on. But I think it's so deep-rooted, the tendency to judge people by their status. And I don't think we trust other people not to do that with us. I do think you have to deal with the income differences themselves. That isn't simply a matter of redistribution through taxes and benefits, though that's an important part of it. The main reason why most of our societies have become more unequal since around 1980 is that top incomes have taken off. You know, these multinational CEOs and financiers who are paying themselves millions. I think that we have to actually have a long-term project of democratizing the economy. About half the members of the European Union, half the countries in the European Union have some legislation for employee representation on company boards. It's usually only token, not always. In Germany, it's quite strong. But I think we must have the aim of getting large-scale employee representation, growing over time, but also to have more incentives to expand the sector of employee cooperatives and employee buyouts and things like that. Those more democratic forms have been shown in a lot of studies now to do better, even in terms of things like productivity, but I think they're also nicer places to work than ones where you're simply valued for the contribution you make to company profits.
Thank you for that, Richard. If anyone would like to unmute themselves, and if you don't mind, introduce yourself before you raise the comment or question, that would be great. So Fiachra, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. Thanks, Richard. Really interesting to hear you. My name's Fiachra, and I'm one of the participants on the Development Perspectives Advocacy Program this year. I'm very interested in the idea of transforming the economy, like you're saying, that we need to reduce inequality. I've lived in Mexico and I've seen those houses with the barbed wire and the glass on top, and they're not happy. I mean, it's not working for anybody because the ones with all the money are terrified of getting kidnapped, and and rightfully so, because the people on the outside, so it's not working for anybody. So my question is similar to Bobby's question. Could high taxation with an aggressive spend on services be a big part of the answer? So we cap the income at whatever, at 100,000 or 200,000, and anything over that is taken and used for roads and schools, and to give people medical cards, and to raise the bottom, raise the floor. Is that a big part of the solution? And also another question I have is on the topic of transparency. Do you think increased transparency to look at the nepotism that goes on and the inheritance that goes on, do you think that is part of the solution too?
Yes, I think that we must have that kind of exposure. The rich, I think, at the moment feel that they're respected and admired for their wealth. We must make them instead feel that they're regarded as greedy and selfish. I don't think it matters much whether we have top limits on incomes or whether we tax it all away. I mean, in the 70s and up to sometime in the 70s, top tax rates in Britain and the States, I mean, taxes on the top incomes were something like 70, 80, even 90% briefly. So I don't think it matters whether you tax it away or just have limits on top incomes. I think an American state or two, maybe it's just a proposal, but to tax companies, have higher corporation tax if companies have bigger income differences between the CEOs and production workers. It's that gap that has increased so dramatically since the 1980s. The CEOs in those big companies used to earn in the States 30 or 40 times the average production worker. By the first decade this century, they were earning 300 or 400 times as much. I shouldn't have said earned, because I don't think that's the right word. They got that amount. They paid themselves that amount. And that's what we have to deal with. Before, during most of the 20th century, there was quite a close relationship between the strength of trade unions and inequality. The stronger trade unions were, in terms of a higher proportion of the labor force belonging to trade unions, the lower the inequality. It's really a striking relationship in one country after another. I think that is not just because trade unionism is powerful. I think it's that trade union membership is an indication of the strength of the whole, not just the labor movement, but of social democratic parties, the belief that there's societies can work in a better way. If you like, a countervailing voice. And I expect also earlier on the fear of communism was quite good for capitalism, led to the development of welfare states and so on. I think we must redevelop that idea that there is a better way our societies can work. And we've got to do that in relation to moving towards sustainability. And I showed you that stuff on how inequality led to more consumerism, status consumption, partly because there are really powerful links between greater equality and making it easier to move towards sustainability. So they're not separate issues. To move towards sustainability, we have to have more equal societies.
Thank you, Richard. If we can go, if you don't mind, to Sarah and then to Tom.
So I asked a question in the chat box, but it is linked. So when we talk about inequality, we're mostly talking about wealth inequality here, income inequality. But when we think about income or inequalities, they're based on stereotypes, on biases that are inherent in human nature because of how our social structures are. My question is how do we end up shifting that mindset to a less judgment-based way of interacting with people when there is such a backlash against things like affirmative action training, especially what we're seeing in the US now, where corporations are hoping to work on bias training, but then you have the president saying that is like undemocratic or unconstitutional. So how do we move forward with the less judgment, but making people see that human value isn't linked to necessarily their productive value?
Well, it creates a sort of vicious circle, but I do think that we can't move forward with it separately from reducing the income differences themselves. And people will, we had that, do you remember how before the financial crash, we used to regard the rich as if they were brilliant, and the poor as lazy and stupid. That's still a common idea. People still think that the social hierarchy is basically a hierarchy of ability, that if you've got it, you move up, and if you haven't, you move down. As we know more and more about the malleability of the human brain, especially in early life, basically you get good at whatever you do, if you know, with time, as you learn whatever it is, that affects your the way your brain develops. And people are, if they've got more abilities at the top, it's because they are at the top. Any connection between ability and social position doesn't go from social position to, it doesn't go from ability to social position, it goes the other way around. So that kids of the rich are sent to better schools, are given more opportunities, better education, more stimulus, all sorts of things like that. And that's why they end up more able. But I don't think one should be thinking of just how to change these judgmental attitudes on their own. And things like racism are part of this. Gender prejudices as well. They're not quite separate issues. When anything becomes a marker of low social status, whether it's skin color or what linguistic group you belong to or what religious group you belong to, is seen as a marker of low social status, it attracts the same kind of stigma. So these material inequalities are foundational of the other inequalities. And indeed, women and ethnic minorities use as an indication of the prejudice against them how big the pay disadvantage is. So don't think of these as different issues.
Thank you, Richard. If we can go to Tom.
I was very impressed by Fritz Schumacher's Small is Beautiful back in the early 70s. Is it time to bring back that philosophy? I guess, I believe he was right on the right track at that time. He said we need to turn economics on its head and start to value.
I missed that. He said we need
to turn economics on its head and make it people-centered economics.
Yes, but I'm ashamed to say I've never read Small is Beautiful. I think there are many aspects of smaller local production and activities that are important, but I also think some of the solutions involve high tech. The wind turbines, the solar panels, and so on. We depend on high tech to produce them, though they do also enable more local power generation. So the two things I think need to move forwards together.
Thank you, Richard. And over to Michael for the final question.
I'm almost sorry that I have to be the last question. But during COVID, I think we had an appreciation of essential workers. There was this notion that shopkeepers were essential to keep our economy going. Obviously, nurses were essential to keep the economy going. So I'm just wondering, in this post-COVID world that we hope to get to someday, you know, at this new normal, do you think there is an opportunity that society will take to reevaluate what is essential, who really keeps, you know, the economy going, versus those who we have possibly been overrating and shouldn't be valued as highly, possibly?
I think that was very important, that sense of who the people are who really matter, and the recognition that they were being paid less than anyone else rather than more. And I think it did make many people think about the value of different occupations. I think we should link this up with, I don't know whether you've been aware of David Graeber, unfortunately died of COVID a month or so ago, but a very important anthropologist, also happened to be an anarchist, and he talked about some jobs as having no worth, basically. He said even the people doing them felt worthless and so on because they knew there was no point to the job. But he suggested there was a large swathe of the labour force which generates jobs that aren't strictly worth doing. We don't really need them. I won't, and you look up David Graeber. He's got a lecture on YouTube about bullshit jobs. I think we need to develop that. I think also it relates in a way to the old Marxist idea that the people who really did the important productive work were the workers, and all the people, the layers of society above that weren't doing anything worthwhile. And I think maybe if we are going to move towards a very different kind of society with sustainability, we need to really think about those ideas too, along with what you were raising about the essential jobs.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Michael, for that final question. I suppose just before I hand over to Mog, I just want to sincerely thank you, Richard, for taking the time to join us this evening on behalf of Development Perspectives and SAOLTA. It's a real privilege to hear from you. We've read your work for years, but it's great to have you in a space where we can chat to you more intimately. Fingers crossed at some stage we will cross each other's paths in a physical sense, not just via Zoom. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you for inviting me and for listening. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mog to wrap up tonight's session.
Thanks, Bobby, and thanks, Richard. And I suppose the final word is always a thank you. First of all, I hope that you've all benefited from being here this evening and have taken something essential from the messages of today's event and bring that home with you and into your lives into the future. I wish to thank Irish Aid, who have supported the SAOLTA programme, to thank the consortium, the partners of SAOLTA for their involvement, to the 18 advocates for their not only inputs this evening, but also for all the advocates and for their action projects, their resilience, their ability and flexibility to adapt to this year's programme, which was very different to what they signed up at the beginning of the year. So thank you for that. If you'd like to see some of the other action projects that are available that have come out of this year's project, please feel free to go to our website. We have a wonderful stories of action input, and all of the advocates action projects will be showcased on that. So please feel free to tap into that at a later date. Thanks to the staff team as well and the leaders who have jumped through all the COVID related hurdles that have been thrown at them this year. If you'd like to support a little bit more of the work of SAOLTA and Development Perspectives, and particularly the SDG Advocate training, feel free to sign up to our newsletter, to write a blog. We have a See the World Differently blog page. Lots of interesting inputs in that. You could consider becoming an SDG advocate in 2021. You can join in our discussions, debates, and online workshops. So thanks to Bobby and to all of you for being here this evening. Stay safe, stay well, be kind. Gormila Maihagut, Ihawai.
SAOLTA presents Hear the World Differently.